This is Allison coming at you live from the Shaker Historical Society in Shaker Heights, Ohio. We're back for our third installment of Educator's Corner, and it's a beautiful winter day here in Northeast Ohio, and I'm happy to have you all with us. Today, it's going to feel a little bit more like a Julia Child sort of vibe today because we're talking about cooking and historic recipes. So today I'm going to be discussing a lot of different issues that come up. Um, but let me recap what we've already gone over. So last episode we talked about candles and candle making and the history of candles in Shaker society, but also in a larger context as well. We kind of briefly touched on that. Those kits are still available in our Spirit Tree gift shop for $17, and it makes you 4 beautiful beeswax candles for you to enjoy. So, and again, we are live streaming on 2 different platforms right now, on our Instagram Live and on our Facebook Live. So if you missed it here or missed it one place, you can definitely find it somewhere else. And this is going to be recorded and kept on our YouTube page and on our Instagram and Facebook pages separately. So you can find this many different places if you are still interested or if you weren't able to catch this all on your lunch break. So I talked about this one. I talked about doing this one as one of my favorites because it is something that I feel really strongly about, and it's something that I studied when I was in my master's program for history. So today we're going to be discussing historical recipes and how to recreate these recipes in a modern kitchen. There's a lot of issues when you are recreating or trying to preserve a certain taste or flavor profile when you're working with a historic recipe. Um, Maybe you have your grandmother's or even a great-grandparent's recipe cards or handwritten cookbook with recipes that you would like to bring new life to in this year. A lot of us are home right now, still hunkering down and looking for something to keep us busy. And if you haven't been one of the people to start making and baking things in your oven or in your kitchens, I suggest now would be a great time to do that. So, although I am by no means a professional cook or baker, I am a historian and I did research in our own SHS library, which is where I currently am now. And I also did some research on my own through my own personal family archives of our cooking and baking recipes. So I found examples on how to read and understand and recreate these recipes in your own modern kitchen. So exploring this topic, like I said, is something I did when I was in my master's program for history, and I found it interesting how all cultures and people across the world have different rituals and traditions relating to food. Um, the study falls under the academic field of material culture. So if you're interested in this sort of thing and you really like how people interact with food and the rituals and customs that come along with food, you would be really interested in material culture, and the subgroup of foodways is what it's technically called. I'm going to be touching on a few of my findings today and also exploring some of the trials and tribulations that I had when recreating a couple of these recipes that I'm going to be talking about. And hopefully help you guys decipher your own mystical, maybe even grease-stained recipes that you have been bequeathed over time. So first topic of discussion, and something that I found a lot when doing my research independently and through the internet. The internet is, again, a fantastic source of information, and you can definitely find a lot out there to help you in this sort of endeavor. But the first topic is heats and temperatures. So something that I found to be kind of annoying when you're going through old recipes is, what does a medium oven mean? I even wrote that in the introduction panel to this talk, is what is a medium oven? What is a medium oven? What is a high oven? What is a hot oven, a slow oven, a low oven? What temperatures are those? Because I don't know about you guys, but my modern Samsung oven does not have a setting for medium oven. So what does that translate to? So upon going through some books that we have in our collection, you are feel free when we are back open again, or if you would like to come take a look at these while we are still closed to the public, you can make a reservation with us. You can give us a call or email us, and we will set up a time for you to come and look at these. So we have a lot of different cookbooks in our collection, actually a whole shelf and a half of them over there. Some of them are rare finds, like these ones, the Children's Guild book. And some of them are, from the shakers. So I've recreated a shaker recipe today that I'm going to be talking about, but all of these different books have references to what a high, hot, medium, low, slow oven is. And I've condensed it all down for you. So I found that a slow or low oven is 250 to 300 degrees. You typically don't go over 300 degrees Fahrenheit when you are doing a low or slow oven. A medium or a moderate oven, as some will describe it, is around 350 to 375. I've seen it listed as high as 385 and as low as 325. So you have to kind of play around with it and think about the recipe that you're making. Cupcakes, like I made today, there was no temperature listed for these cupcakes, so I kind of extrapolated from other cupcake recipes that I've made in the past and did a little bit of independent research to find a different cupcake recipe, and I kind of guesstimated at 365, and they turned out okay. And then I've seen a high or a hot oven listed. It's typically above 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, think about the recipe that you're making. If you're making a pizza dough or a bread dough or some sort of doughy thing, it's probably going to need a higher oven or a hotter oven. And typically those would have been done in the olden days over maybe a brick fireplace or some sort of large enclosed oven. So think about how hot that would probably be over a smoking enclosed fire. And those temperatures are usually around 400 plus. I've seen them up to, 500 degrees. So it's as much as you're willing to kind of trial and error with it. A good rule of thumb is to just check it often. Don't open the oven to let the heat out, but just to kind of check it, look inside, see if it's, cooking, see if it's baking, and if it's starting to catch or if it's starting to burn in any spots. Maybe lower the temperature or, reassess, take it out earlier. Use your best intuition, use your best judgment when using an oven. But that's kind of what I found with this. So I have a little cheat sheet that I've made today, and I will make all these citations available for all the books that I'm referencing. I will be posting them all in the comments after this is over, and I will be posting them in the YouTube, description box afterwards as well. So all of these books, as I said, are available here. They're all historical. The Manx book, which is this book right here, it's the cookery book. That's the one that I got the heat descriptions from that are the slow, low, medium, and high temperatures. So that's the one I got this one from. And then the Shaker cookbook, Not Bread, Bread Alone, is another one that lists a lot of the temperatures as well. Again, I will be posting all this information as well, so if you're not taking notes, I will be also kind of capping everything that I put in the comments below. So next, we've covered temperature. Now, ingredients and conversions. So this is another thing that I ran into when I was making my delicious cupcakes and cornbread yesterday. The transition I found interesting between spices. So I made cupcakes yesterday, which I will show you here. So this is the cupcake that I made yesterday. It is not my best work, but I tried to make do with what I can. Again, I'm not a baker, I'm a historian. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the interesting thing that I noticed, especially when you're talking about baked goods, is the transition from dry spices to a more liquid spice over time. And I'll kind of talk about that in context of the cupcakes that I made because this is something I found quite interesting. I'm going to steal this recipe out of this book. So I'll talk about the preservation techniques of this in a little bit, but this is my great-grandmother's recipe for cupcakes. This cupcake recipe just has a list of ingredients and measurements, and it has no oven temperature. It doesn't even say that you need liners. It doesn't say anything about any materials that you're going to need. It just lists the ingredients, and you just kind of have to extrapolate from there. But on the back, so shout out to my mom, Sheila, for putting this all together and letting me borrow these today for this example. On the back, she listed her own cupcake recipe on the top, and my grandmother's. So this one is my great-grandmother's recipe, and then this one is my grandmother's recipe. And something I found really interesting, and I can't really show you because the camera's not great quality, but there is a transition from using cinnamon and nutmeg in my great-grandmother's recipe to vanilla extract in my grandmother's and my mom's recipe. So I found that to be quite interesting when you're talking about the availability of spices. Spices were often very well sought after. There wasn't a lot of ways to transit or put in transit rather vanilla extract that we would know today that you can just buy in a bottle and just kind of pour over things. So oftentimes that's why we have a lot of old rum cake recipes. Rum was often used as a substitute for flavor. You have a lot of alcohol-based recipes because that just that little bit of extra spice will make the cake taste nice. I suppose that rhymed. I didn't mean it to. Okay, so talking about conversions, and I'm not talking about, metric to US standard conversions. There are plenty of those out there on on the internet as a general whole. You can definitely find those if you type in, measurement conversions. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about ingredient conversions. So while I was making the shaker recipe for this cornbread here, this little brown cornbread here, it had listed a cup of finely diced suet. Suet is a beef fat rendering that was typically used as a hardened, sort of lardy fat when used in cooking or baking. And I don't know about you guys, but I just don't have suet on hand. Unfortunately, I have butter, I have Crisco, I have shortening, but I do not have any animal fat byproducts. So I had to kind of figure out if that's something that I wanted to stay true to the flavor of the recipe or if I wanted to change. Now, if you wanted to go ahead and use beef suet, you could probably find some at a local butcher shop or a meat processing plant. But suet is usually it's probably going to be rendered down. If you go to a butcher shop, you're going to have to render it yourself and then reset it. It's a little bit of an extra step, but again, these recipes are very old. So this is something that they would have been doing themselves already, and they just didn't want to waste any part of their animal that they were going to be eating. So it makes sense from a historical perspective that they didn't use, butter or shortening because shortening is a relatively modern invention when you're talking about these historic recipes. But beef suet is something that would have been readily available and something that they would have had on hand, as well as lard and other sorts of fats that are derived from animals. So moving forward with that, you also have the transition from from molasses to sugar. So in this recipe in particular, I picked this one because it's from the 19th century. This is from the 1800s, and it does not use any sugar. It only has molasses in it, but it's considered a sweet Johnny cake. Sweet Johnny corn cake is, I think, the actual name of it. I can double check in this cookbook if you're ever interested. But it has only molasses in it and cornmeal. And that's how it's kind of held together. And it bakes just like a cornbread. But there's no sugar. So the transition from sugar to molasses was also a big historical shift in the availability of products. There wasn't a lot of availability for sugar. Refined sugar was a very expensive thing to come across, especially in the 1900s. And it was not really necessary for their diet at that time. They were making a lot of things with other byproducts, like molasses is a byproduct of the sugar industry. They would have been making, things with beet sugar rather than cane sugar. And it's all about the locality of the food. Moving forward, another interesting thing when you're looking at recipes is, especially when I was looking at my grandmother's recipes, there are a lot of mentions to historical ingredients that we probably don't know what the exact translation is for in the 21st century. One of the ones that I always found to be interesting is oleo. Oleo is a margarine or shortening that is supposed to be like a substitute for a dairy-based butter, but it's a shortening that is, I don't know if it was a name brand. I mean, somebody who knows more about this than me, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's essentially a part of the lexicon or the vernacular of historic recipes to include oleo. And it was just essentially a Crisco sort of branding. It's similar to how we would say a Kleenex instead of a tissue, but you know that when you ask for a Kleenex, you're asking for just a facial tissue. Um, I think that that's kind of the same path that oleo takes as well. It was just a short name for shortening or for margarine. I actually did a little bit of research on that, and apparently oleo comes from like a Latin and Greek name that is supposed to be like a margarine, oleomargarine. It's like the actual root of that name, which I found pretty cool. So moving forward with that, another thing that I was kind of encountered with this trial and error, I'm going to be completely honest with everyone that's watching this right now. These cupcakes are the driest cupcakes I have ever made in my life. They are very, very dry. They're very dense, and I couldn't figure out why they were so dense. When I was making these cupcakes, I was following the recipe, albeit it was very, not the best recipe. And as I was making it, it called for rolled oats. And in my mind, rolled oats, it just means, you put, I think what was it, a half cup of rolled oats? Yep, a half cup or 1 cup of rolled oats. I have that because there was no possible way. I was like, there's no way that it's going to use a full cup of rolled oats. That's going to make this way too dry. So what I ended up doing was using a half cup instead. And I was like, okay, we're going to see if this works. And it just kind of made it a little bit more grainy. And as I was pouring them out, it just looked a little bit thick, a little dense. And I knew that they were going to be a more dense cupcake. Well, when they came out, they were incredibly dry. They still are incredibly dry. So I asked my mother and said, hey, what could I have done different? I asked for rolled oats, and I think that's what made it very dry. And she had said, did you cook the oats before you put them in the batter? And I said, no, I thought you just dumped them in there. Well, apparently that was something that was missing from this recipe, is that you're supposed to cook the oats before you put them in the batter. So these are things that get lost in translation, lost over the generations and through the decades. But I think next time I make these cupcakes, I'm definitely going to cook the rolled oats before I put them into the batter, just to make it a little bit more of a nice, moist cupcake. So there's all these little things and little pieces and parts that are missing over the decades and over the generations where these are passed down. Somebody might have just written these down as shorthand, maybe as a recipe list or ingredient list when they went to the store or went to a dry goods store and said, hey, I know I'm going to be making this recipe. Can I please buy X amount of all of these things? Another thing that I noticed, and it's worth mentioning because I personally didn't know, and I would like to share my experiences as well. Maybe you more experienced cooks and bakers will know this already, but the pound sign, or as modern people would call it, a hashtag sign, can stand for a pound or it can stand for a cup in my recipe book. So in the recipe book that I was looking at from my grandmother's and her recipe cards, oftentimes it is shorthand to just write a little hashtag or a little pound sign as shorthand for a pound or for a cup. Now, again, it's going to depend on the recipe that you're making because, you might not need a pound of flour, but you might need a cup of flour, and that's probably what that means. But other shorthands for tablespoon, cup, half cup, those all are pretty much standard. And in my experience looking through these recipes of my own and in the cookbooks, they're all perfectly denoted, or denoted, rather, I think that's the word I'm looking for, with the modern vernacular of C, little c, and big T, little t sort of style. So moving forward, and again, if you guys have any questions while I am recording this, or while I'm presenting this live, or if maybe you're watching this a couple of weeks from now, or maybe years down the line, if you have questions, feel free to comment them or email them to me at education@shakerhistory.org. Be happy to help you. So the third part of this, and there's only 4 parts, and I'm so excited about this, is family history and foodways. Now, I mentioned that I am a historian first. I am not a baker. I'm not an experienced cook, but I am a historian. I'm a professional historian, and my personal family history is what draws me to looking at recipes, looking at other cultures' recipes, and looking at our collections recipes. So as I'm going through these compilation books of collected recipes, especially in this one by Carolyn Piercy, there are lots of different stories that accompany the recipes. There are events that things were made for. If you think of them today as Christmas cookies, we have to preserve that memory of what do you do at Christmas time? What do you do for Hanukkah? What are the traditions that your family or maybe your community has around certain types of food? Um, Now I'm going to share a couple of my personal anecdotes that I found when, interviewing my mother about all of our recipes and coming up with this Educator's Corner today that I found really lighthearted and interesting, and hopefully inspires you to do a little bit of your own research within your family, your immediate family, or maybe even do some digging of your own in your own recipe cards, or just to recall or record your personal memories around food. So our personal history, my family's personal history, my grandmother and great grandmother were Slovak immigrants, Eastern European immigrants in the Youngstown area. They moved here at the turn of the 19th or turn of the 20th century and brought with them all of their Eastern European roots in a large Eastern European community. And a couple of these things that they would make are, more ethnically Eastern European or Slovak. Excuse me if I'm speaking any of these wrong. If anyone out there speaks Slovak or Polish and wants to correct me, I am, by all means, I'm not fluent in either of those languages, unfortunately. So, a couple of the things that I found really interesting are when my mother was telling me about the story of my grandmother making begna, which is a shortbread cookie that is folded over a almost like a half circle, a semicircle metal form, and sprinkled with broken up sugar cubes and nuts, like chopped nuts. And it's baked on this form, and it's just a simple shortbread cookie that they would make around Easter or around Christmas time. And it was just a staple at all the wedding cookie tables as well, because we're from that area where we have wedding cookie tables, and they were baked on a form. But when we were looking at the recipe, and unfortunately I was not able to bring the recipe with me today, but when we were looking at the recipe in my grandmother's handwriting, it does not mention the forms for the begna. Now these begna are custom made, like I would say about 6 inches tall by maybe 4 inches wide. It's not a very big form, but that's an integral part of the recipe that is left out. So upon us, when me and my mother finally go through all these recipes, we're going to have to record and make sure that we have all of those intricate little details and all of those little things written into the recipe for future generations to enjoy. Another interesting thing were, in our family at least, was strudel. Now, I love strudel. I don't know if anyone else out there likes strudel, but my great grandmother always made apple strudel. Unfortunately, she passed well before I was born, but I get these stories secondhand from my mother and from my grandmother. So when my great grandmother would make phyllo dough, because this was long before you could just go to the store and pick up a pack of puff pastry or phyllo dough out of the freezer section or out of the refrigerated section, they would get together. My great grandmother and my great aunt would get together, have a little sleepover in their, in their 80s and their 70s, and they would make phyllo dough. They would make it by stretching it around the table, taking the dough little bit by little bit and chasing each other around the table to stretch out the dough so that way they could make phyllo dough. And I found this story to be very interesting and very cute just to think about, two older women in my family just, having a blast chasing each other around a kitchen table, trying to stretch out some dough to make strudel. These little stories add up, and my last one is just about kolache. So I don't know if anyone else in this area is familiar with kolache. It's essentially a rolled dough that has either a fruit filling, typically it's a nut filling or a poppy seed filling, and it is just divine. I love it. It's usually served, it almost looks like a pepperoni roll, but it's a sweet roll, and you cut it up into individual servings and you serve it as almost like a cookie. And the kolache that my parents or my grandparents used to make was all nuts and poppy seeds, and they have nut grinders to grind the nuts down. Long before you could just go to a bakery or to a wholesaler to buy the filling or the nut meats, as some of it's called, you would have to make your own filling. And something that I asked, as I was thinking out loud, I was like, why wouldn't they just chop the nuts finely? I feel like that would kind of do the same thing. And my mother told me that they would use the grinder, which is essentially just a small little, it looks like a coffee grinder, a small coffee grinder to grind the nuts because it would stimulate the oils in the nuts so that would make more of a paste rather than just a chopped coarse nut, which I find interesting. You don't think about these things when you're buying it off the shelf or how it's produced. At least most people don't. I think that I'm kind of a weird person for thinking about these things, but it's interesting to me to see how things have progressed over time. And it just is so cool to me to share this with you. And I hope that you as well at home take this inspiration and also get these recipes on your own and help to preserve your family's story. That brings me to my last and closing topic, which is preservation of recipes. So if you missed our previous workshop on this past Saturday, it was preservation or museum techniques for home preservation. I think that was the correct term. I'm sure I'll be corrected. But these sort of techniques you can use at your disposal at home. So I'm just going to quickly go over the things that my family has done and also kind of share some ways that you can also preserve these as well. So, of course, if you have books or any sort of binded material, this one was produced by the Manx Society in Cleveland, and it just has a plastic edge that is binded. Some of them are a little bit more formal with a hard cover, so it doesn't have to be a personal cookbook. It could be, a mass-produced cookbook that you just want to take care of. And then also we have the Children's Guild one, which is in our rare books here. So this one has obviously a metal binding, and some of the spine is kind of coming apart. So how do you preserve these? How do you, preserve these while also, maybe using them in a kitchen or using them as a guide to make something out of them? Cookbooks are a little bit more tricky because you want to use them with extreme care. So you may notice today that I'm not wearing gloves. It's actually better that you don't wear gloves when handling delicate paper objects because you lose a tactile sense when you put cotton gloves on. Nitrile gloves are used occasionally if you want to be that way. But typically in our museum, and it's best practice to just wash your hands very, very well, which I did prior to this talk, and using just delicate care when handling any old object. So where was I going with this? Cookbooks. So of course you would like to digitize and use them. My one, and I will shout this from the rooftops, please do not laminate, do not home laminate any of your cookbooks, any of your recipes. Lamination is not a very good way of doing things. I winced a little bit when I saw my mother's cookbook and a couple of the recipes were laminated. Most at-home laminators are not safe for historic documents. Please do not use a laminator. But instead, if you have an old cookbook like this one here, the Children's Guild cookbook, that is kind of falling apart, has a metal binding, or maybe it has a traditional hard back binding that is falling apart, use the utmost care and try to digitize it with either a phone or a flatbed scanner if you have one. Most at-home scanners or printers, all-in-ones, whatever you have, are good enough quality to scan and digitize the pages of cookbooks that you wish to keep. Of course, it's always better to do the full cookbook, but if you have a particular recipe that you like and that is important to your family and your history, please use this technique to do that. You want to just carefully open up your cookbook like so. So the first page is a little bit, it's not actually attached, but to use the utmost care when you are flipping it onto the flatbed scanner. Additionally, if your book is even worse or worse off than this one is, do not even attempt to flip it over. Don't try to do that. It's just going to end up badly because, again, you have to treat this with the utmost and delicate care. Instead, what you can use is just your cell phone. Most cell phones these days are very, very high quality cameras, and you can take very good photos of each page. There are plenty of apps out there as well to help you with that, but even just your standard cell phone camera app and Photos app will do in this scenario. You just take photos of each page to kind of keep the page in. It's best to use a black or dark background unless it's a different style. Of course, gray would always be preferred in this sort of scenario, but to use a dark flat background, no print or anything around it, just so that way if you wish to crop it down to preserve just the recipe page itself, you can do that as well. So those are kind of my quick tips for cookbooks in particular. Again, you want to store them if you're going to keep the original as is. You want to store it in a place that is not going to be a fire, a flood risk. So definitely not on the bottom shelf of your kitchen, or definitely not above your stove or anything like that. You want to keep these in a cool, dry place, a closet, a higher up bookshelf, maybe in a study away from the kitchen somewhere. You want to treat these with care because they're the only ones that are, probably around in your family. Again, we also recommend acid-free boxes and envelopes. This is an acid-free envelope. You can buy these online through Amazon, or if you wanted to go the more professional route, you can order them through Gaylord Archival, but that's going to be a little bit pricier. But most of acid-free stuff is widely available nowadays from craft stores or from Amazon. So just make sure when you're looking for envelopes like this one or for boxes that you search for acid-free or archival quality. It all depends on the tags that they're using. Let me just slide this back in here. So the next one I'm going to be talking about is recipe cards. Now this one is probably the more popular one, especially among my family and among my friends. I'm going to show you our recipe card box. So this is a recipe card box from my grandmother's basement when we were cleaning it out. I've kept all of the box together, so this is an aluminum box. And of course, it's not the best way to keep it in this box just because, even though it is aluminum, there are metal or steel pieces that could easily rust on here, and the top is not secured very well, and it's just probably not the best place to keep it. But say you have one of these, or you have a cloth one, or you have some other place that you're keeping your recipe cards. I've even seen them in Rolodexes before. So if you have them in a sort of box like this, and you want to preserve them, an idea to do that is Mylar sheaths. So this is just a regular index card. This one is for blonde brownies, and I think it's my grandmother's writing. So to preserve this as it was, I took it out of, I think I compiled this box full of another box. It was a very big preservation project, a personal preservation project for me, but we just covered them in Mylar sheets. So these are just simple, clear plastic sheets, polypropylene, something you might also see them as listed as that. And I forget where I got these from. I think I actually bought them online, but this was, maybe 10 years ago. I don't know if I got them from Amazon or not. But you can easily find these online. Just search index cards or whatever size card you have. Here's another recipe card for barley stroganoff stew, which looks delightful. I'm very hungry right now. But you can easily keep these little recipe cards in these Mylar sheaths and just keep them to preserve them. It's very easy for cards like these to get, grease stained or to get smudged up in the kitchen. So my best recommendation for you is to put them in the Mylar sheets, digitize them if you can, again, on a flatbed scanner or using your phone, and keep them in a couple of different places, digitally. Not don't separate the stash, but digitally keep them at least 2 to 3 different places, and make sure that they're easily accessible and easily labeled, especially digitally. And again, if you wanted to watch our workshop on digital preservation, that is available on our Facebook page, and you can go and check that out for more information on how to digitize. So I've talked about the recipe cards and the cookbooks, but what about scrapbooks? So my wonderful mother made a scrapbook of all of her favorite recipes that she's ever had or ever made, or things that she wanted to make but maybe hasn't got the opportunity yet. And she has made several of these 3-ring binders. These are just bog standard 3-ring binders, scrapbooks that she picked up probably from Walmart. Now you might have other scrapbooks at home or anything like that with recipes in them, but my mother and she used this just bog standard 3-ring binder, just like this, and it's a mix of old and new recipes. So old recipes that are written in her handwriting or in my aunt or my grandmother's handwriting that she had taken a digital scan of and made a print copy of and then pasted it into the scrapbook. So all of the copies in here are all, let me see if I can hold it up for you. You're probably not going to be able to see, but these are all just print copies of recipe cards and recipes that she liked or printed off the internet, and some of them are mixed in with old ones and new ones. So if you wanted to do a scrapbook of all of your family's recipes and include sort of an anecdotal or historical memory or your personal memory alongside a historical one, this is probably a cool way to do it. There's also plenty of apps out there. There's like a Digitize Your Cookbook app. I know that's out there. There's plenty of different softwares and things you can use, but if you wanted a physical, tangible copy like this, I mean, this works. She did. She made this for her own personal use, rather than to preserve. She just made it this way so it was easier for her to find and use. But it's actually a really good way to use it, and I wanted to show it off today because it's taken her a long time to make this, and she has several of these. So another thing you can use is, again, Mylar sheaths. I think these ones aren't Mylar, perhaps. They're just like the Avery sheets. She does this just so when she takes it out of here to put it in the kitchen so she can hold it up, it doesn't get any flour or grease or anything spilled on it. And it kind of preserves her own hard work that she's done. But that's kind of all I have for you guys today, is to work on this amazing food waste project. Again, it's a passion project of mine. It's something that I've always enjoyed doing. It's something I've always enjoyed learning about. And I implore you all to start having these conversations with your family members, even your children. Discuss with them, the stories that you have around maybe a soup or a casserole dish, or even the cookies that we enjoy around the winter time. Have a discussion with them about your special memories with them, and enjoy making memories with them as well. Again, with digitization, the last thing I'm going to talk about is just make sure you're reassessing your digital means of recording and keeping all of those files every 5 years, because technology advances, and at one point we all thought that DVDs and VHS tapes were going to be the end all be all, and now we stream everything. So just reassess your technology every couple of years, and make sure that you are keeping track of all of your family's history and your family's story as well. Again, it's a perfect time of year. It's the perfect time to just, hunker down, make grandma's favorite, stuffed cabbage recipe, or give the beef barley stew a try. There's plenty of different things out there to help you. And again, if you have any questions at all, please, email me. You can email me at education@shakerhistory.org. You can message us here on Facebook or on Instagram, just at Shaker History, and we will do our best to answer any questions that you have and help you out in any way that we can. And Ellen, no worries. It's been my pleasure to put this together. It's been my passion project since I started these education corners, and it's just something that I love to gush about. I love to talk about. So again, if you have any questions, or if you would like help getting started in any way, please reach out to me. Let me know. I'd be happy to help you. Again, I am not a cook. I am not a baker. I can do my best with the limited knowledge that I have. But as far as preservation and historical knowledge and memories and all of that sort of process, and making sure that these are saved for the next generation and generations to come, I'd be happy to help you and happy to help out anyone that wants to know any more about this. So thank you again for coming today. I appreciate you being here. Just a quick plug for our upcoming events. We have our annual meeting that is happening this Sunday at 3 p.m. and you have to register on our Facebook page. It is a Zoom webinar, so if you're interested in checking that out, it is free to the public. All you have to do is register on Facebook prior to, so we can send you the link and you can be all set up to watch that. We have a lot of exciting things happening in February as well. A very long list that I would exhaust myself talking about here, but we will be posting about those in the weeks to come on our Facebook and Instagram page. And as always, if you didn't see something here, or if you want more information about the Shaker Historical Society, if you would like to volunteer, or would like more information, or want to visit our gift shop, or anything about research or anything that we offer here, please check out our website at shakerhistory.org. And hopefully, if you have any questions at all about it, just let me know. And I thank you again for being here today, and I hope that you enjoyed this quick presentation, and have a good day.